What's going on, guys? It's your boy Cuban Mike. You listen to the Tape Deck Hour, and tonight I got a special guest. Um, this young man here is coming straight from Florida. Is it Miami? What part of
It's
Florida you say?
Miami.
Miami,
Yeah.
of course. Why not even? I should have
Yeah.
known. Yeah, Miami, just like the rest of them. Um, Coming straight out of Miami. Once again, outside of the hip hop thing, always bring awareness when it comes to Cuba. I got another young man right here. He has a dope story and he has a play that he's producing. And we got a lot going on, a lot to talk about, but not enough time, man. So, ladies and gentlemen, I got the man Alian Collazo, man. What's going on, brother?
Brother, thank you for making time to have me on your show. There's a lot going on. We have the Walls Have Ears play that's coming up here in the city of Miami in the Doral Cultural Arts Center from June 13th all the way through the 6th of July. And it's my first stab at like trying to produce a play.
Yeah.
But it's very dear to my heart because this is a story of the political prisoners. It's a story about what happens to people in Cuba when they speak out, when they decide to have a difference of opinion. And it truly embodies the story of so many people in the Cuban American community and in the diaspora. We, as you know, I was born in Cuba, but so many folks here in Miami were or are the grandkids, the grandsons, the granddaughters of those people who have those stories. So you're going to we're working on the play, but we're working on a lot of other things too. For Cuban Freedom March, which is my nonprofit that focuses on human rights. It's a nonprofit that's led not just by me, but by a phenomenal group of young people who devote their time. It's they don't get paid for it. It's just about educating people, advocating and protesting for what's right, for the rights of people. So there's a lot going on. So I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to dive in to my story, to how we've met, to how this is all important, also to the broader picture, right, of the rights of people here in America, across the world, and so many other things that really truly matter to the now, to the Cuba issue, but also to so much.
Bet. I was trying to get as much research as I can from you, and it was upsetting because I got like so much, but not enough. So I was going through all like your videos and even our interactions. So it's like I think I need like a four-part series with you because you have so much going on and you have an interesting story. Um, Before we get to the play, which I'm upset that I cannot check out this play because I'm stuck here in Massachusetts. I know never have, but I wish there'd be some kind of way you guys can make it up north. But either way, been much success to you. But we're gonna get to that in a second. First and foremost, I want to see if we could get a brief, intro within your life and your story and give a description of your life because as I recall, when I was checking up on my research, you did came in a boat with your mother.
Yeah. So I
All
was
right, let's.
born in Cuba.
All right, go ahead, go
Yeah.
ahead.
I was born in Cuba. I left, my father left Cuba when I was 5 years old, and my mother and I stayed behind. He went to Spain. He was on a plane ride. Like many Cubans at that time, they could only go to like places like Russia or like other places that you don't want to go to, which are worse, like North Korea. So my father got a visa to go, yeah, to go to Russia to work, and he knew, like many others at that time, that the flights had to stop in Madrid in Spain. So he got this flight, knowing that he was not going to go to Russia. He shared very little information with me or my mother at all. We found out, hey, like he got off this flight, didn't go back onto the next flight, because the Cuban regime, like someone knocked at our door and told us, hey, your father didn't make it to where he was supposed to. And that's when like kind of the saga of like um, living in a country where, everybody knows what you're doing, but you really don't realize it until you realize it because there's so much surveillance of everything and there's so much um, just repression about your everyday life. And it came to light when my father left Cuba. I would go to school. People were, they were not kind to anybody who they looked at as a traitor, as, someone whose father left the country. And my mother and my father kept in touch. And when my father got an asylum visa, came to America a little bit over 2 years after, they reconnected. And my mother said, I want to take her son out of Cuba. And at that time, there wasn't even a U.S. embassy in Cuba. It was an intersection through the Swiss embassy. And the normal family reunification process could take between 10 and 15 years. So my mother and my father wanted me to grow up in a family unit. My father decided, along with my mother, that the best and quickest way was to, you know, find money, because it's not cheap, and get me and my mom out of Cuba on a boat. And that was a really difficult decision. My mother was in her early 20s. I was just about to turn 8 years old, and this is 2003. And my mom and I go through this journey of going from Central Cuba, where I was born, where she was born, going to Havana, hiding for days, and there goes my cat. Told you
Yeah.
guys. Um, and hiding for days in Havana. What was supposed to be like a 2, 3 day ordeal turned out into like almost 3 months. We would get a call from this guy who was like, "Hey, I'm your padrino. Come to the Metro Zoo. We're gonna celebrate your birthday." And that was the code, like lingo, for you to go to the gathering place where there was gonna be this bus that was gonna pick us up, take us to the most western part of the coast in Cuba, and take us, bring us out of Cuba and to the U.S. So we did this, I don't know how many times, like 13 times, and the bus would never come, and you would see the people, the same people every time. But you would not talk to them. My mother was like, "You very careful, like if you say one word." And the state security, and for those who don't know, state security is like these people who could be your neighbor, who could be your cousin, who could be your uncle, and they work for the government, and they're, street lingo, they're snitches.
The snitches.
They
The
are,
snitch. Yeah.
yeah, they are people who literally will say, "Hey, like I saw someone carrying a bag of eggs," and that might sound crazy to you, but someone who's carrying a bag of eggs and they don't have a receipt in Cuba could go to jail. Or like, "I see you doing X," and forget about, doing like a protest or leaving your house with a sign that says, "I want to elect who represents me." Like, if a bag of eggs is criminal, imagine an act of the ability to have a voice, to ask for a future. So, long story short, finally one day, almost 3 months into this, we go to the Havana Metro Zoo where we were supposed to gather. A bus described as it was described to us with, gray, red stripes actually gets there. We all get on the bus. All the same people that we had seen all these 13 plus times, they get on the bus with us. The bus is like a normal bus. It makes stops in the city, but really no one's getting off. And it's driving little by little out and out of Havana into the westernmost province of Cuba, Pinal del Rio.
Yeah.
And little by little, it's crazy because no one would get off. And then we kind of said, "Oh, this is the group," but still the fear is so big that no one's talking to each other. And someone gets on the bus, and it's one of these guys who's in the military. They're called las boinas rojas, the red berets. That they're like the ones who are like the Cuban special forces.
Hmm.
And he gets on, and the man stays on literally almost till the end. Like no one is getting off, and we surely thought that, okay, we're all going to jail at best, or something worse is going to happen to us because we're not getting off the bus. This man must think something's going on. He's going to notify somebody. But at the end of the day, he gets off, and the bus drives kind of like, now it's almost 11 o'clock at night. And this bus driver says, "Good luck. I'm not going further. I've risked enough for you guys, and you guys just need to keep walking." And it's pitch dark, in Western Cuba in Pinar del Rio, and we're like close to the coast, and it's 43 people, and one of them is a pregnant woman who's 7 months pregnant, so 44 of us.
Yes.
Um, and they just leave us and they tell us there's this man who's gonna come out of the wild. He goes by El Guajiro, which means the farmer, the countryside man, like the man from the countryside.
Yeah.
And we're like, well, what do you mean? Like my mother, who's like very on edge, is like, are you like turning us in? Like, and he's like, look, I'm not, but the Cuban Coast Guard starts patrolling like in person after this area, and like I just can't risk it anymore.
Mhm.
So we're like, he's like, keep walking straight, and someone's gonna come out of the woods. And we're like walking, and it's like getting marshier as we get, closer and closer to the coast, and it smells because it's not like a beach, it's like the swamps. And surely enough, some man comes out and he's like, I'm El Guajiro. I am the person that you've been told. And essentially what happens is he takes us, we're walking now. We've walked probably more than like close to 10 miles. It's now like almost 2, almost 3 in the morning.
Mhm.
And finally, we get to the boat where he knows where the boat is. And it's a 30-foot boat, and there's 44 of us, including the baby in this woman's stomach. And essentially, it becomes a free for all. Like everybody tries to get on the boat at once, and like it's very chaotic. I did not know how to swim. I was the
Yeah.
youngest person in this whole thing.
How old were you at the time again? You were eight?
And
You were eight at the time? 8 years old at the
I
time?
was 8.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay. Continue.
I was 8.
Right.
And finally, like at some point, I'm on the boat. I can't see my mom, and I'm like so worried. I'm like, oh my God, I'm by myself. And then at some point, my mother gets on the boat, and then finally, we're all on the boat, and we start like very, very slowly leaving Cuban national waters. And like no, like this boat has 4 motors, but it's like barely has one on just to like not make any noise because if you make noise, they can catch you, and we know what that means. We know
Yeah.
like prison, God knows. Um, so
You're
little by
done.
little, when it hits like that 12 nautical miles outside of Cuban waters and you're in international water, this boat like starts like full throttle. I had never been on a boat before. Like I had never, any of that. So people on there, probably a lot of them had the same situation. They had not been, on a boat or like out in the open ocean. And little by little, 3.5, 4.5 hours later, like the sun starts coming out. And we had gone into this marshes, like we were full of mud, like this disgusting, smelly mud, that we had to go through to get on the boat. And it smelled terrible. Like we smelled terrible. And little by little, we're out there, and the sun starts coming out. It's a brand new day. And then couple hours later, like the boat starts making noises, and it's like like the motors of the boat, and
Mm.
then all of a sudden it stops, and the two drivers are like, "Oh, don't worry, we're gonna stop to fish," and everybody was like a little bit like, why are we doing that? Like, mind you, they told us it was gonna be a quick trip. Bring like a bottle or two of water, like a couple crackers, like nothing big. It's gonna be quick. So it wasn't quick. The motors of the boat broke down, and we started drifting. And people started getting really sick, including my mother. My mother was so sick that like
Mhm.
at some point just all vomiting on to the side of ourselves. I mean, we could barely move. It's almost over a day, and they kept saying, "Oh, we're gonna fix the boat," and da da da, da, to the point that they were like, "Hey, like the motors of the boat are broken." And now the sun is like really hitting you. It's like really, really bad. And thank God that disgusting mud is what helps us actually. It like keeps us from like getting totally sunburned because the mud like dries on our skin and on our clothing. And we till this day I'm like it was all like God's plan because like we didn't get like severely sunburned because of that disgusting mud that we were like, wow, this terrible smell, but it actually worked out. And
Mm.
my mother is like just puking nonstop. People are puking, I'm puking, I can't move at some point. And I wasn't scared because I had my mom. You
Yeah.
know, that was my biggest. But at some point when my mom got really sick, it's the only time in that journey that I really became scared. I thought my mother was going to die.
Mm.
And I remember telling myself there was this old woman. She was in her 80s. And later on in Mexico, where we ended up going to Mexico, not coming here, it was a whole. Um, I learned about her story, and I learned about like she had left Cuba, had sold everything. Her husband had been a political prisoner many years ago in Cuba, and then her son had like a lot of issues in Cuba with the political system and had come to the United States, and she was alone, and she had sold everything she had to come to the States. And she was in her 80s. And at some point I remember this woman, I don't recall her name, but I do recall the name of the lady who was pregnant, Anya, who
Yeah.
we stayed in touch with, still stay in touch with her son who was born here, thank God.
Hmm.
You know, and she says, just pray to whatever you believe in, because I think we're all gonna die. And that's when I felt the most scared because I could see my mother couldn't really speak back to me, and her skin was like staying together because of how dehydrated she was.
Yeah.
And there was a guy who was a doctor who was also leaving Cuba, and he would tell the people like La Rubia, my mother's blonde, La Rubia es la más mal que está, the worst of all.
Mm.
And I remember hearing that like in my subconscious, also being like sick, like vomiting vile. And I just kept telling myself, if my mother's gonna die, I hope I die before my mother dies because I don't want to be alone,
Yeah.
like in this boat. And maybe like 3 hours passed by, 2 hours, I don't know. After this woman said that, I don't know. In my belief, it was the people really prayed in my mind. And I still want to believe that I believe that. And one motor of the boat turned on,
Wow.
and we made it to Yucatan in Mexico.
Mexico. Wow.
Yeah. And from there, I learned how to swim in a safe house that they hid us in Mexico in the pool. Crazy. I didn't know how to swim, so I learned how to
Mm.
swim in Mexico. I've been to Mexico several times, for tourism after this. And I always, every time I land, like whether it's in Mexico City or something, I'm like, I learned how to swim here. Like I learned how to swim in this country. So it 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 was a terrible nightmare, and then the nightmare of going through Mexico to the border with the United States, coming to the border, crossing the border, asking for asylum, for political asylum at the border.
Mm.
The first McDonald's I ever had in America or in the world was the Border Patrol when they picked us up and they processed us and said, "Oh, you have someone who's going to take care of you. You have a place to go. All of these things." They before they released us, they took us to buy food, and in the Border Patrol van, they passed by a McDonald's in Texas, and it was incredible because they were like, "Oh, what do you want?" And I was like, "I don't know. Like we've never had this food." So that was my first exposure ever to like to America. And then we got on a bus. My father he had to borrow $10,000 from me and 10 from my mother. This is 2003 to pay these human smugglers to get us out of Cuba. So it was
Yeah.
a $10,000 fee per person, including the baby that was in this woman's womb.
Oh.
Was a $10,000 fee that they had to pay them. So my father couldn't afford a flight for us, so we took this bus, and it was like, imagine we couldn't speak a word of English,
Yeah.
and we were like at bus stations, and we are like, what bus do we take to the next station, and like all of these things. And then we reunited with my father in St. Pete, in Florida, where I grew up.
Hmm.
And I grew up in St. Pete. My parents, became successful entrepreneurs. I went to high school there. And then when it was time to go to college, I applied to a bunch of universities, and I got an offer from Florida International University in Miami. And I was like, I never even thought about going to Miami to study. I was really interested in studying in Washington, D.C. or somewhere else because I studied foreign affairs. And I came to FIU and I fell in love with FIU. And it was the best decision I made because it brought me back to Miami. And then
Mm.
it reconnected me with my Cuban roots. Although like I never lost my Spanish, like all of these things, like my parents were very like, you have to keep your Spanish, you have to learn, you have to, it's gonna help you in the future, all of these things. But I grew up in a community where mostly people spoke English. No Spanish at all. Very few people in school spoke Spanish. Very few people in school could pronounce my name, Alian. They were like alien. I used to go by Al because no one could pronounce my name. Some people did it on purpose. Some people just really couldn't pronounce it.
Yeah.
Uh, but nonetheless, I reconnected with Miami, and then I reconnected with my Cuban roots through Miami. And then I always knew, what was happening back in Cuba. My mother has all of her family, like all of our family was still there. I would speak to my grandmother periodically. I went back to Cuba several times when I could to see my family. And then of course, as I got more politically involved and as I got more and more involved in being very against the Cuban government, the Cuban regime, the dictatorship, um, I obviously it's not a safe or good idea to go to Cuba. But my family is there. My uncles and my tias, and my mother has 8 aunts that live there, and they still live through this misery of 20 plus hours of blackouts, um, you know, uh, zero rights to have rights, and it just goes on and on. And it's incredible to think that this is happening. I'm here in my apartment on the 43rd floor in Miami,
Yeah.
and it's happening 90 miles from here. And it's been happening for over 60 years. And
Continuing and continuing.
yeah, and continuing. And some people actually, unfortunately, they idolize some of the horrific things that are happening there, and they romanticize the idea of in Cuba there's this, or in Cuba there's free education or free healthcare. Um, and little do they understand at what cost has that fictitious idea. Because when you really drill down and see like what healthcare looks like, which is like, oh yeah, you can go to a hospital and enter for free. They don't ask for an insurance card, but like there's no needles for you. There's no gloves. Like,
Yeah.
sure, like what does that mean? Like, oh yeah, there's free education, but like they don't let you read the books that you decide to read about. Like you can only read about socialism in a library. You can't read about capitalism. You can't read about anything that you feel like. And people are like, oh, but in America we have book banning this. I'm like, guys, it's very different. No one's banning books in public libraries here.
Hmm.
You can set, like, and talk about and debate what kids should read in a library in a school and whatever you feel like about that. And there's debate about it. But no one is telling you that you can't go to a public library and take out the book that you want for your child.
Yeah.
No one is saying that.
Or within your own
So,
house.
exactly. Or within your own
Own
house,
house.
or that you
Yeah.
can go on the internet and research whatever
Yeah.
you like. So people truly have, and then they idolize people like Che Guevara or Fidel
Yeah.
Castro.
Yeah.
And little do they know or understand the tragedy of who they are idolizing and what they have done to an entire nation of people. And the saddest thing about it is the division that these people have created, where they have separated families like entire families and generations
Oh, yeah.
uh, for generations. And they've done that to divide and conquer the Cuban nation. And that's a really sad thing. But as we say in Cuba, no hay mal que dure 100 años ni cuerpo que lo resista. So there's no ill that will last 100 years or body that will be able to, resist such a thing. So we have to tell our story. And I learned that when I came to Miami, I saw the exile community and I saw and heard their stories. And as a young person, sometimes I couldn't understand them. And as I became more ingrained in the community and as I listened to them and as I heard about their suffering, as I saw their suffering through my story, through the story of my family, although less years as those who came in the 60s and 70s and 80s, but very large similarities, like very similar things, different eras, different times, but it was the same division. They couldn't see their family. They couldn't go back to the block where they grew up in. They could come around and sometimes I wake up and I say, wow, me huele a Cuba. Like it smells like Cuba. Like I smell something and I'm like, wow, it smells like my neighborhood. It smells like when I was a kid. And then you realize I might die and I might never see that again.
Mm.
And that is the price that the Cuban people have paid because of this tragedy that our nation has gone through. And but that's why we have a responsibility to tell that story and to uplift and to also let other people know that like these ideologies are dangerous and that they might seem good and that they might seem fair, and that although America is imperfect, the solutions to those imperfections are not these dangerous ideologies. It's to better the way of life that we have here and to look for better solutions, to do it in a way that doesn't destroy, you know, the good for the idea of the perfect. And people forget that.
Wow. That's that's one hell of an introduction. That's one introduction. Um, you know, you said a lot, so I want to go back on a couple of things because you remind me of a guest I had on my show a couple of weeks ago. I'm gonna have the episode air in a couple of days from now. But she said something that was similar to your father. Her father went through the same thing. Like he was born in Cuba, but he ended up in Spain. And it bugged me out because that's not the first, second, or third time I heard that story. But I told her, yo, it's so crazy that we're legit 90 miles from our destination. But in order to get there, we have to go to the other side of the world. It's like a big loop. And then to do that big loop, you have to go right back to where you started. That's like saying, yo, I live across the street from you, but instead of crossing the street, I need you to go all the way around to the other like 9 blocks and then come around. So it was supposed to be a 2 minute walk, ends up being like an hour walk. And that just bugs me out how that happens. It's incredible. You
But
know,
it's the
yeah,
story of Cubans.
yeah,
I've had the privilege to travel to over 40 countries in the world because of work, because of leisure, because God has been really good to me.
yeah.
And everywhere I've gone, there is not one country I have gone to that I don't find someone who's Cuban. I always say, and I joke around, I'm like, we're like the plague. We're everywhere. And it's because we have had to like find the way to to survive anywhere in the world outside of Cuba. And oftentimes, if I find a Cuban in Rome, whether they're like selling ice cream or serving tables or have their own cafe, or like if you find them in like Tel Aviv or wherever you go and you find a Cuban person,
Yeah.
they have a story of why they left, of why they had to run away.
And it's not pretty.
And and it's not pretty, but they also have a beautiful success story of how they went to another place foreign to them, and they were entrepreneurial, they succeeded, they did this, they did that, their son graduated from this, like they have a beautiful story.
Hmm.
Not easy, not like perfect, right? Like nothing is, but they were able to create something for themselves. They were able to succeed. And you find that the only place that Cubans could not succeed is inside of Cuba. But everywhere else they go, whether it's here in Miami and you're like, wow, Miami was, you know, the role that the Cuban diaspora, the Cuban community has had in Miami, fundamental. But that role we've had in so many other places. One place that we can't have that role is in Cuba.
Home.
And it's because of the dictatorship that keeps the Cuban people from being able to create opportunities for themselves where they were born. Because this dictatorship wants to control every aspect of their lives. And if they create success for themselves, then that to them is a danger to the control that they have over society.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that. These things that I describe to people are very foreign because thank God most people are born in places where governments want you to succeed because they don't want to have to find and figure out a way to take care of you. It's the opposite
Hmm.
in Cuba. And then they oppress you because they don't want you to have the ability to question what they do.
Yeah. Um, there's something else that you mentioned that kind of stick out to me. That something happened within your introduction that you gave us. And I want to touch a little bit about that. That when your dad left, you had to be cautious the way you move because you know, to the island, he was considered as a traitor. I had a
Yeah.
lady that she's another lady that she has a book right now, and they told her something similar to that, like their parents was with the revolution, and then once they found out what the revolution was, they were like, okay, I want out. So they kind of did something like they seized their property, and I guess they had like a mark, and that mark was showing that you were a betrayer to the revolution, you were a Cela Gusano, et cetera, et cetera. Um, what um the community knew that your dad would pretty much a quote unquote Salah. So what kind of trials and tribulations you had to go through once they found out that you were, I hate saying this freaking whip, Gusan.
Yes. I mean, people treat you differently.
Yeah,
They treat you differently in school. They question you. You know that they're watching you always, but now
yeah,
you know that they're watching you. You're scared of what to say and what to do in your own house. I recall having to move and live with my grandmother because, our house and everything it was a very problematic thing. Like your property becomes the property of the state. I mean, it is a very difficult situation. And in my grandmother's house, when we would talk about things, mind you, you're in your own house. It's my grandmother, my grandfather, my mother, and I. When we were talking about my dad, we were so fearful that we would say, Shh, habla bajito, like don't
calladito, calladito, todo
yeah, like
calladito, todo
very,
calladito.
very like be very quiet. And then you like when I grew up and I would like start thinking backwards, it was the innate fear that we had within ourselves because no one was listening. you know, in our
Yeah,
house, of course. Outside our house, yes. Like
yeah,
people were listening, people were watching, people were telling you, hey, like, you are not a person that we care about. Like your family is not people that we care about. And
mm,
there's a famous saying that like Fidel said in the early start of the revolution. And he said, dentro de la revolución, todo. Fuera de la revolución, nada. So he said, yeah, you have freedom within the revolution. Outside of it, you have nothing. And people were like, oh, he's a revolutionary. That's
yeah,
fine. What that means is that you had to bow down to his will of a one party system, or guess what? You had no life. You have
curtains,
no life and you have no
curtains.
value. And these are the people, supported by Che Guevara, who had the UNAP camps where they sent over 55,000 people, which were modern day concentration camps in the Americas. And people are like, oh, but we had Japanese internment camps in America. And I'm saying, yes, it was wrong to have those,
Yeah.
but we didn't kill those people. Yes, they were internment camps. Yes, they were wrong to have. Absolutely.
They
But
were
what we had in
torture.
Cuba were concentration camps
Hmm.
where they would make people go dig their own graves at night and choose and kill two or three. And then they would say, okay, we're going to spare you for tonight after you dug your own grave and had
Hmm.
been bitten by mosquitoes and almost, were catching malaria. And then the next day they would put you to work all day long in military factories. And you know who did the exact same thing?
This guy,
Nazis.
the Hitler guy,
Yes,
the
the
Hitler guy.
Nazis
Yeah.
did the
Yeah.
exact same thing. And Stalin did the exact same thing, you know, and people forget that. And we had that in Cuba. And when I was, I ran for state representative here in Florida. And when I was campaigning, I knocked over 15,000 doors of people. And I knocked on the door of a man who was very mad at me because I had gone back to Cuba and there was this photo of me circulating that I had gone to the beach in Cuba and they like made this whole thing about it.
Smear campaign.
And
It's a
huh?
smear. They put a smear campaign on you. Yeah, like a smear
A
campaign.
bunch of things. And
Yeah.
it's politics and we have the beauty of having, politics here in this country. So I really wasn't mad about it because I know what values I have and you know, but this man was really mad. And when I knocked on his door, he was livid. He really was mad. This is in like a part of town here in Miami that is like 96% Cuban Americans. It's Westchester. It's like most of the people there, and they are from a different time where they left Cuba much earlier than I left Cuba. They saw
Hmm.
things and experienced things that were different.
Yeah.
And this man, I listened. I listened to him, and to the point that he was insulting me, and I still listened to him.
Yeah, that's
And I
rough.
felt that I had to listen to him because I started to understand his pain and the pain of people like him in the era of the time that he left Cuba. And at the end of the conversation, he felt bad because I said, look, the only thing I can tell you, I said, is I'm not a communist. I don't believe in that ideology. And I care deeply about the cause of freedom for our people. And if you don't believe that, that's okay. I came to your door to ask for your vote. You told me how you feel. You don't have to vote for me, and that's okay. Um, as I was walking out, he came out of his house again, and he said, "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry that I was, really rude to you. I'm a Catholic. I believe that how I treated you was wrong." And I said, "No worries. It's okay. Like I understand your pain, and that's why I can't tell you anything other than I'm sorry that my actions made you feel a certain way. But my words and my reassurance to you is exactly what I told you a minute ago."
Hmm.
And he said, he told me his story after he came out of why he felt the way he felt. And he was one of the survivors of one of those camps that I just talked to you about. He told me
Ooh.
the story,
Oh,
yeah, of having to be in a UNAP camp in the
oh,
early days of the Cuban Revolution,
oh.
of not knowing if he was going to survive, of having to dig his own grave every night and having to go back with three or four less people because they would shoot through two or three, and that he believed that God saved him. Essentially, God did save him.
Yeah.
And this man called me later on throughout my campaign, and I didn't win my campaign, and it's fine. And it was a wonderful experience of getting to know my community better.
Hmm.
Um, but what I keep dear to my heart, that story, because it really woke me up even more to why we had to double down on letting the world know through what we're doing with Cuban Freedom March, through all of these things, to letting the world know the truth about what happens and what has happened in Cuba. And letting people know that like, hey, like this is not like a Cuba thing. Like it's not because we're Cuban. Like you would probably care if it was happening to anybody else, right? This oppression, this type of system. You care, and we see it with other things happening around the world. But for some reason, the Cuban regime did such a great job at selling a story to the world because they had the resources and the time, over 6 decades to sell this story of who they are and what they've done, and they've whitewashed the reality. And it's people like this man who are really old and they're gonna die, who know that reality
Yeah.
and who lived it. And they don't have maybe the resources, the time, or most importantly, they're just tired.
They're tired.
They've lived through so many generations of like renditions of pain. Um, it is now our job as young people who know, and I always say, we know that there's going to be a better tomorrow for Cuba.
Mm.
But in the meantime, we have to do our part.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I do with my platform. That's why there's a long list of people I have to thank, just to take the time and chance to tell their story in Massachusetts because it's not Florida. And Massachusetts is a different animal when I tell you when it comes to politics and involves us. There's a bunch of things I want to tell you after the thing because it's a lot I've been dealing with up here up north. And I told Rosa what happened when she came to the tape deck. I told her a brief story what happened dealing with these politics. Long story short, they're not a fan of the Cubans, but
Of
I'll tell you
course,
about that. Yeah, because they believe in the propaganda. But I want to move things forward with the um, Cuban Freedom March. I'm sorry, keep your organization, how that came about. I was always curious. Did that became before or after July 11th?
it came after July 11th.
Okay.
And yeah, it came after July 11th, and we were all like involved in some way or somehow in supporting, things that were happening, um, lifting the voice and letting people know. But we kind of like felt that the Cuban people, we always say like change in Cuba has to come from within.
Yes.
That's like the most important thing. Like everybody says, we can do whatever we want, we can say whatever we want, but change there has to come from within Cuba. Um, some people call for intervention, military intervention, these things. I believe that like that would be bloodshed. And people are like, oh yeah, you have, eye for an eye, you kill all of the people that did all these terrible things. And I say, look, I'm not one that believes that.
Mhm.
I believe that there should be justice, but there's a difference between justice and then there's a difference between doing the things the way that these people did things to us, right?
Yeah.
Because then you become one of them, but with a different idea. And I don't want to ever be one of them. I want us to have a place in Cuba where we can have trials of people who committed crimes. And if maximum sentences are served by a trial by a jury, yes, let's do that. But let's not have firing squads because we have a different ideology, because then we're doing what they did to us, and then we're no different than them. You
That
know,
that's rough. That's rough because I'm kind of like on the side of like intervention because it's like unfortunately with these people there's no there's no talking and reasoning with them. They're just too extreme to the point that if we don't get extreme as them, they'll just be, they only
yes,
respect fear and violence. They respect fear and violence. That whole let's talk and let's get to the table. They
but it's
never
not
was about.
about it's not about the United States talking with them. It's about the Cuban people internally rebelling against the people that oppress them.
Okay.
Because there's one fact in all of this, and I remind people all the time. Outside countries have no interest in Cuba changing.
Oh, yeah,
Like
100%. Look, listen, we're not. I
no
keep telling
matter no
everybody.
matter, some countries have an interest in it staying the same. like China and Russia have an interest in Cuba staying the same for their geopolitical interests. The
Yeah.
United States would love for Cuba to change, and they are more proactive in doing things that are, that accelerate that possibility, but they are not going to intervene and get involved and fight for that change. The Cuban people have to do that,
Hmm.
you know, and that change has to come from within. So Cuban Freedom March came about because on July 11th, for the first time in my lifetime, I saw an opportunity for that change from within. The balance of fear changed
Hmm.
very quickly. The Cuban people had been taught and ingrained to fear the people that governed over them, and not really governed, but oppressed them for generations. And that fear, because of everything that led up to it, the pandemic, the shortages, every single thing, that fear was lost on July 11th. And when I was a kid, people would fear to even talk about buying a carton of eggs illegally in Cuba. Now you have people screaming every day in different parts of the country, like down with the communist regime, this,
Yeah.
that, and the other. You have this belief, but also this belief becoming visualized into action that they can change that system. And people are like, well, why doesn't it change? Well, guys, we've had 60 plus years of absolute monopolization of violence against people by one side.
Hmm.
So that's not gonna like disappear or dissipate overnight. But that balance of power, in my view, having lived inside that monster, has now changed. And now it's the Cuban regime, the dictatorship, that is constantly having to figure out how do we survive the next day. Whereas before, it had the ease of knowing that people feared them. Now they fear the Cuban people because they visualized on July 11th that people can break that cycle of fear.
Yeah.
And now it's what I always say. Now we're on a road to escalation, right? The regime sees that it's losing power. It escalates its oppressive measures. The Cuban people see the reality, but also the world, because the world, for the first time in a long time, saw what we Cubans lived for 60 plus years. They saw Cubans in the streets being shot at, killed, dragged, beaten by the regime that said that they provided free education and that they provided this and that they were lovely people.
Yeah.
But what we had been yelling in exile for 60 years, CNN and the BBC and Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya and all of these channels had never aired before because it
Yeah.
had never happened in such a concentrated fashion. But on July 11th, it did. And
Couldn't
then
escape it.
they couldn't make any excuses anymore to not cover it.
Yeah.
And then this la tela, like the curtain
Curtain was pulled down.
of this lie that they had sold to the world fell down. So you had that concentration together, and now you're on the road of what I see and what I say is escalation. We're going to see a road of more violence against the Cuban people that we have ever seen since the start of the revolution.
Hmm.
But that violence is what's going to bring the end to that regime. Because when you oppress people so much, you bring them to the brink of having nothing to lose. And that's when you have July 11th happen. And that's where July 11th was organic. It wasn't
Yeah.
orchestrated from the outside. It was Cuban led by Cubans saying enough.
And it wasn't the people from Miami. That's the only thing always stick out because
No.
every time this always happened, it was like, oh, it's only the people of Miami. It was Florida. It's only the privilege or whatever. And it wasn't that this time. It was the people within the whole island that finally just had enough and said, I'm standing up to
Correct.
this.
And the people in Miami, for those who are like, oh, the privilege, this, that, and that. Let me just remind you, the Cuban nation is not just the nation of Cubans who are in Cuba.
Oh, talk about it, please.
You know,
Tell my audience, please tell them.
The Cuban nation is anybody who is Cuban outside of Cuba. It's like people are like, oh, like people who are Italian, they have Italian heritage. You
Mm,
know, folks up there in Boston, Irish that came
mm,
from wherever, from England,
mm.
English
Yeah,
background, you know, those ties still exist. So for anybody to think that like, oh, we see our Cuban brothers or sisters, or in my case, my uncles and my cousins and my friends that went to school with me getting shot, beaten, and that I'm supposed to what? Stay quiet?
yeah,
So that's what you say. But then these are the same people who say, well, I don't believe in people being oppressed. Oh, you don't believe in people being oppressed when when it's the ideologies that you support or are against that are being
yeah,
oppressed. You have to be a universal believer in the rights of people. It's either you believe in it or you don't. I tell people this about the Constitution all the time. You can't believe in freedom of religion, but then only vouch for Christians. No,
yeah.
freedom of religion means freedom for everybody to practice their religion.
Religion. Yep.
You know? It's the same for human rights. You can't pick and choose which human rights or which group you think should have human rights. It's either you believe in universal human rights for people, and this is a case about human rights. We can talk about and debate U.S. foreign policy on Cuba any day of the week, whether
Yeah.
you're for the embargo, against it. I remind people all the time, the embargo does not control domestic policy inside of Cuba.
Repeat that one more
Okay?
time. Repeat that one more
The,
time for the people in the
the
back that missed that.
embargo, the embargo does not control domestic policy by the Cuban dictatorship inside of Cuba. The embargo is not the one that says that Cubans cannot fish in their own waters. It's the dictatorship. The embargo does not dictate that Cubans can have access to free internet inside of Cuba. It's the dictatorship. The embargo doesn't dictate that there can be no free press, freedom of religion, rights to have rights inside of Cuba.
Yeah.
It's the dictatorship. And like I
Hmm.
said, we can debate the embargo any day of the week. What I will not debate with anybody is who is responsible for the state of decay and the state of destruction that Cuba as a country finds itself in today,
Hmm.
and the pain that has been brought to the Cuban people. There is one entity responsible for that, and that is the communist totalitarian dictatorship that has oppressed the Cuban people for over 65 years.
Hmm.
There's
Thank you
no
for
debate
telling.
about it.
No debate. No debate. Thank you for telling
Yeah,
that.
there's no
Thank
debate
you.
about it. And if you think that that's not the case, for those people out there who think that's not the case, for those people out there who say they stand against oppression, they stand for the rights of people, of all people, that they stand against privilege and whatever that means. I just want to remind you that if you believe that the Cuban dictatorship is supporting, safeguarding, or helping the Cuban people, you stand for oppression. You stand for picking and choosing who should have and who should not have universal human rights. You stand on the side of things that you supposedly say you stand against. So check your own privilege, check your own ideology, do some deep soul diving.
Hmm.
Because what you stand for, if you stand by a dictatorship that has oppressed and destroyed families for over 65 years, you stand totally against what you supposedly say you stand for.
Hmm.
So I remind that to people. There are a lot of people who will say, well, I don't support, this, that, and the other, and I support, people to have universal rights in America. And then we talk about Cuba. And they're like, I
Hmm.
love Che Guevara. And I'm like,
Yeah.
really? So you love my people getting killed in concentration camps?
Yeah.
Wow. What type of human rights activist are you?
Yeah. It's crazy because where I live right now, I'm dealing with two types of ignorance. And you got the one side of ignorant that they really don't know what's going on. So you have to school them. Like I have a friend who went to high school out here in Massachusetts, and she was curious about all the things that I was posting. She told me when she was in high school in Massachusetts, they had classes on Fidel Castro, and the classes they had on him. They made him look like he was like the next Martin Luther King. So you have these schools that really like teaching them that he was this great man fighting for freedom. So she didn't. I mean, she did her own research, so she knew that that was kind of crazy, and it was full of it. She got into my social media, and then found out other things that she didn't know. But I'm like, yo, how is like these high schools teaching me these lies? Um, it
Here,
was insane.
so I often find myself having this discussion with people in our own community. I always like to say Cuba has been under dictatorship not just for 65 years, but the government we had before was also a dictatorship. It wasn't a
Yeah.
totalitarian dictatorship, but it was a dictatorship.
Mm,
We need to be honest with ourselves about why the Cuban Revolution happened. It was because there was a dictator before the one we got.
mm-hmm.
And we can debate who was the worst dictator, but to me, dictatorship is not good. Period.
Period.
Um, the issue that there is with the legacy or the history behind Fidel Castro is that you can say, hey, he came to take away a dictator. And you can say that.
Mm,
That's the truth. But what he came for, he did not deliver, right?
mm,
He promised the Cuban people democracy. He promised the Cuban people a different system. He promised them a republic that existed before Batista decided, to go on a full coup and
mm-hmm.
take over the country and never hold elections again. He didn't advertise himself as a socialist or as a communist.
No, he lied.
On the
He said,
contrary,
yeah, he said he wasn't
yeah.
that.
So when we tell this history of anyone, it should be real. We can't just pick and choose to say, well, he was a revolutionary who came to save the Cuban people and then leave it at that. Because if you leave it at that, then you're lying to people, right? So that is where we have to really, there has to be a better job done. And there are educational systems in this country and in the world where people pick and choose what to say about people in history. And I think we have to be holistic about it because history is meant to be all encompassing. It's supposed to show the good, the bad, the ugly. It's supposed to teach people to make their own conclusions about, hey, the good things, let's build on them. The bad things, let's not repeat them.
Yeah,
But if you just romanticize this man, then what do we think is going to happen? And then you have this and you do it over and over and over again and then there is a correlation as to why people are like those Cubans in Miami,
yeah,
what is wrong with them?
yeah,
Because we have generations of people in this country and in the world who have been taught a part of history. They haven't been taught an entire holistic, you know, view of history
yeah,
vis-a-vis the Cuban Revolution, vis-a-vis the actors and the characters in the Cuban Revolution, which there were many other people. It wasn't just Fidel and Che Guevara. This
yeah.
was a revolution by the Cuban people that was hijacked by this man, which
Mm-hmm.
is what people forget. The Cuban people, Fidel Castro wasn't Superman. Fidel Castro succeeded because the people of Cuba supported him.
Yep.
But they supported him because what he told to them was totally different than what he later did. Because
Yeah.
of what he was going to do, he would have advertised to them. They would have been like, why are we doing this? We already have a dictator. We don't want another dictator.
Mm-hmm.
So that is truly where we have to do what we can, with the resources that we have and with our voice to tell the truth. To tell the truth. I always say, like, I will die. I could die right now. But what can never be said of me is that I stood by and didn't try to tell the world the story of what truly happened to my people.
Yeah. No, listen, man, you're killing it right now, man. This is so much gem. You listen to 102.9 Tape Deck, and we are dropping gems for you. Um, there's something that I want to catch up on right real quick because you went to is it FIU, FIU, right?
FIU,
Florida.
FIU.
Okay, so that college has been very interesting for the last couple of years. I won't touch too much about it because I've known people that have gone there. I'm not at school, but just trying to like bring anti-communist and socialist thing and FIU got a real interesting thing trying to promote socialists and communists there. I mean, it's a college thing because it happens here in Massachusetts too with Harvard and MIT and all these elite schools. But there's a strong indoctrination that goes on to these colleges that has been going on since the 70s. Um, again, I have a lady that did my show, and she talks about that when she went to college, being Cuban, and you had all these elites telling her what Cuban is really like. And mind you, she's Cuban. It was just such a pompous, ridiculous thing that was kicking to her. Shout out to Anna because she has a book right now that's phenomenal at the moment. Um, and shout out to Lily that they kind of shared the same story that they're kind of similar to the struggle that we all go through as people. But the difference between here and the indoctrination in Cuba that I really want you to talk about, we can at least get away from it and have other ways to get our story across. But you told a story that I saw on YouTube that how they did this thing with kids. Oh, gee, I'm trying to remember the video, but it was this thing that they had that they had this like these commercial of this lady in a monster suit, and you said something you were having nightmares about it, and that
Yeah,
was just like a way to like scare the kids to like
yeah.
show fear. Can you
So
tell the story?
it's a crazy story.
Yeah,
I was in Cuba.
and this is part of the indoctrination due to the
Yeah,
kids, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
I
please
was in
talk about that.
Cuba. I lived in Cuba during the Elian Gonzalez uh
Yes, yes,
saga.
yes. Yeah,
And I served on the board of trustees of FIU. And
the joy.
we would go up to Washington, D.C., to be advocates for the university and for funding for the university. And we have really great advocates here in South Florida for the Cuba issue in Congress. One of them is a legend. Her name is Ileana Ross-Letny. And Ileana was the congresswoman who was up front on the issue of Elian when Elian was, here in the States. And she was like, hey, we have to keep him here. Like, this is the best for him. Like, going back to Cuba is going to really be detrimental to him. All of these things, which were all true, by the way. But in Cuba, I was a 6-year-old in second grade, just starting out, like finishing first grade, going to second grade. And on Cuban television, nonstop. Mind you, this is 2003 in Cuba. Today there's 4 TV channels or five. Back then there were three, all state controlled. Everything you see, everything you consume, whether it's a newspaper, whether it's a book, whether it's state TV, it's all brainwashing constantly, constantly, constantly. And they would describe Ileana Ross-Letnin on television as La Loa Feroz, the fierce wolf who wanted to keep Elian here in America, away from his father. Mind you, like Elian's mother had separated from the dad, and really he had never taken care of him. I mean, it was a million things to the point that she was, took her son, and it later on in life I reflected a lot because that was my mother, right?
Hmm.
Taking her son out of Cuba, putting me on a boat, and thank God we survived. Elian survived. His mother doesn't survive. Like the hundreds of thousands that we don't know about that haven't survived.
Yeah.
So, and Ileana, I meet her in Congress, going to talk about FIU. And later on, I stay behind. I say, Congresswoman, I wrote a letter to you when I was like 6.5 years old. And she looked at me and she was a little like, oh, okay. And I was like, I was in Cuba. and I wrote you the most mean, disgusting letter that you probably ever got. And she
Mm,
was like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I was in Cuba during the Elian Gonzalez saga. And they would tell us, you have to write letters to Ileana Rosletnin, the fierce wolf, who's keeping Elian. And as a kid, I truly did connect this idea that this woman was like a beast, like that she was evil. And in my letter, I don't recall exactly the words, but I put something along like those lines, and I write it to Ileana, and she just laughed and laughed. And later on, like she's a phenomenal, phenomenal human being, a voice for the Cuban, community, and was when she was in Congress, and will always be. She's an icon
mhm.
here in our community. But it was crazy because that was an example. Imagine I was 6.5 years old. There was no internet in Cuba at that time. And people were like, why? The embargo. Because the Cuban regime didn't want us to have internet.
Yeah.
Um, you know, there was no access to other TVs, channels, no TV channels. Um, and as a 6 year old, that's what I was being indoctrinated into. And even though like my dad had, left Cuba and these things, there were things you still had to do no matter what.
Mhm.
And that grows up in you. When I came to America, I was scared to go outside of my house, like scared to leave my apartment. And it was because on Cuban TV, they would constantly talk about in America, kids don't have the peace that we have in Cuba. We're poor, we're this, we're that, but at least you can go outside and play without being kidnapped. And it made it seem that like every single place in America, there were kidnappings and killings and all of these things. And no one's saying that there isn't violence in America,
But the way they
but
portrayed it, they exaggerated
never.
the hell out of it.
No, but you know what the crazy thing is? This was the Cuban TV news. So how you turn on your TV in the evening and you find out about what happened in your community, you would expect that you turn on the TV in the evening on Cuban television and you would find out what crime happened in your community, what
Yeah.
happened in Cuba, what's going on. We never were told anything about the murders that happened in our neighborhoods or
Mm.
the things that happened. We were always told about the things, whether true or untrue, that happened elsewhere, so that we could compare what they thought, as a kid, and then you grow up and you start questioning, but oh my God, I live in like this utopia. Like nothing happens here, and the rest of the world is falling apart, although it sucks
Yeah.
because I have no electricity and my school is falling apart. And but it's this brainwashing that when you put it together, like you start thinking, okay, well, maybe this isn't so bad. And it's all done with one purpose: to control you.
Control your mind. All right, I gotta share two quick stories real quick because I have a friend of mine that's Cuban, and she told me something similar to that. That she had cousins in Cuba, and they said this they were pretty much pumping that propaganda. During your years, I guess it was like kids being kidnapped from their homes on the park, but I guess whatever came afterwards was like the thing with school shootings. That all you can't go to school because all you're gonna catch is school shootings. So all this show in Cuba is kids shooting like once a week, and this is why you can't go to the United States. But if you go to school in the United States, you go to school, you gotta find a random kid, and he's going to shoot everybody just because. And she had to talk to her family. It's not even like that out here. It's like a once in a blue moon kind of thing. They're not shooting kids here once a week, like like it's like the Wild Wild West. But something similar happened to my parents, and I found out this happened to a lot of Black Cubans. My mother came here during the 80s, and during when she came to the 80s, she told me she was afraid to go to certain parts of, the United States of America because she still thought that the Klan was still existing. She thought it was gonna be like a random Klan just gonna kidnap my father and just hang you. Or she wouldn't go to a church because they think they're gonna bomb it. This is we're
Yeah.
talking about 80, 81. So once she started talking or whatever, and she moved in a predominantly black Latino community, so there was a lot of Puerto Ricans around. So she's like, yo, can I go to this place? Like, what time can I be home? Like, I heard there's a curfew. They're like, what are you talking about? Like, no, because I'm black. So if I go to a certain place, like, the Klan's gonna come get me. Like, what are you talking about? They haven't done it in the last like 15 years. Like, don't even exist in it. This is all us here. And it was then like such a like rude awakening, like, oh my God, I can't believe they did this to us. And when I went to Washington, I came across a lot of like elderly black Cubans, and they all said the same thing. Like, especially like in the black Cuban neighborhoods in Cuba, that's all they can pump into the community. Like, yo, I'm afraid to go here because I might get shot by a random white person that just hates me. And it wasn't even like that. So,
So they have used, the weaknesses of America, which have become our strengths, by the way.
mhm,
They have used the weaknesses of America to dilute, the realities faced by Cubans.
mhm,
This is a prime example, right? Like, yes, in America we had racism, but we were able to move away from it. We went through a civil war, fought through.
yeah,
We still have. There's racism everywhere in the
yeah,
world, right?
we still have it.
But like, we strive for a better tomorrow, unquestionably, right? Um, in Cuba, this revolution that was supposed to make everybody equal and erase racism and all of these things, I always tell people, you know, Fidel's father was a plantation owner. He owned a plantation in
Hmm.
eastern Cuba. He was a wealthy white man. Fidel grew up a wealthy white man,
Hmm.
very wealthy, went to Belen, one of the most wealthy private schools in Cuba, and became a lawyer. And then said he cared about the poor and making people equal. If you look
Hmm.
at the Cuban Communist Party and you look at the people in power, you look at their Politburo, you look at the military, you look at the intelligence services, you look at the oppressive mechanisms set up to oppress the Cuban people, and then you look at the statistics of people in Cuban jails. Black men and women are the most underserved in Cuba. They are the most underserved in every manner that I just talked about.
Hmm.
There's few to none in the Politburo. There are very few Afro-Cubans, negros, who are, who sit at the table with Raul Castro, who sat at the table with Fidel.
Yeah,
Very few.
count on
Right
one
now,
hand.
I think one or two.
Yeah,
Women who are black, way less.
yeah.
And if you look at the prison population, it's incredible. It's four to like for every white prisoner, which by the way, the imprisonment in Cuba is incredible for their population.
Hmm.
There are more prisons in Cuba per capita than like probably only China or North Korea.
Mm.
Um, and very few people talk about that. And in those prisons, black men and women are a disproportionate size of those imprisoned. And guess who's doing that? The people who told your mom that, like, here in America, there was curfew for black people in the 80s. And they
Hmm.
keep telling those things, right? And it's like, we're not saying that there wasn't racism in America. We're not saying
Yeah,
that there isn't racism in America. Yes, there is, but we have moved forward. We have
yeah.
instituted,
It's not the
constitution.
40s. It's not the 40s. Because my mom, she thought it was the 1940s races, and they didn't even
Correct.
remotely
Correct.
close to the
Correct.
1940s.
Correct.
That's all it was.
And thank God we've made progress. And yes, there's
Yeah,
still bad things happening, and we still have
yeah,
to keep each other accountable. No question. But what they're describing to people is fear mongering, because
yep.
the reality that people face in Cuba as a person of color or as an average everyday person is oppression. You
Hmm.
can't speak your mind. You can't be free. You can't question anything. So they want people to feel like, oh, here at least I can walk out of my house.
Hmm.
And I, you know, I have this, that, or the other. It's all these illusions that they make. And at the end of the day, the only way to fully describe it is they own you.
Yeah.
They own everything around you. They own you. They own your existence. And they can allow you to live as much as they want to or not.
Or not. Yep. Well said. Well said. So let's talk about your play. The Walls Got Ears.
The Walls Got Ears.
Uh,
So
and
it's it.
yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Go for it.
No, I just want to see like tell my audience what's the play about and how did you came across being the producer to it.
Yes. So I'm not the playwright. Robbie Ramos, who is a phenomenal writer and an actor, is Miami based, and it's he sits with his grandfather, who's a political prisoner, and was in Isla de Pino, which is an island that's part of Cuba, below Cuba.
Mhm.
Um, and he was in a prison, in a political prison there, and his grandfather tells him the story. So um, this takes place during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it's meant to be parts in English, parts in Spanish. The whole idea is to get younger people to come and to understand and to learn about the history of political imprisonment in Cuba. That is a history that spans from when the play takes time to right at this very moment, where there's over 1,000 of them that we know of in political prison. There's probably way more that we know of or will ever, unfortunately, ever know
Yeah.
about. And so my fraternity brother that I went to FIU with, Gabriel Bonilla, is a director for the play, and it has been the play has been played and done and acted twice here in our community. And I went the last time at the Cuban American, at the Cuban Museum, at the Cuban American Diaspora Museum, and I saw it and I really fell in love with the play. I thought it was really beautiful in terms of how powerful it was, in terms of telling the story, in terms of telling the truth, and it was immersive. So usually theater, like you look down into the theater. This theater was the theater is in the center, the actors are there, and you are around them as they are acting this very powerful story. So you feel like you're there, like you are a part of it. You are experiencing what these prisoners, what these people have gone through and went through and are going through. So I said I want to get involved in whatever way. I helped them write a couple of grants, and then they told me, "Oh, you want to be a producer for the play?" And I said, "I don't know what that entails." And they're like, "Well, it entails what you're doing, like helping us put it together." And I said, "Okay, I'm in." So that's how it came about. And it's super exciting because we're bringing it to the Doral Cultural Arts Center. We're bringing a lot of community partners into this. Univision 23, which is the largest TV channel, is going to be our media partner. Badia, which is the major season here in South Florida, but one of a beautiful story, right? Of like a man who came from Cuba who had a little cart and would sell spices, and then his company just sold for over $1 billion, right? The story of success that we could have in Cuba, but we can't. So we have all these partners coming together to sponsor the play. But the most beautiful thing is we got this grant that can allow college students and also high school students to come and watch it for free. Because I
Nice.
want young people to come and be able to get educated about this matter. And some people just don't want to read about this. It's a tough topic. It's something that's
It gets depressing. It gets very
it's
depressing.
innately depressing. It really
Yeah.
is. And
Yeah.
through the arts, through the power of art, sometimes we can bridge that gap. And this is what we're really looking forward to. So June 13th is the opening night. We're gonna have 15 acts, and we have some of phenomenal cast. Um, we have some people that have been in the Amparo experience, which was a really powerful story about the real story of Bacardi, another success story of people who had to flee and leave Cuba.
Hmm.
Um, and some of the actors were a part of that. We have Susana Perez, who was the diva of Cuban television until she realized that the regime was using her, and she left. And now she lives here in exile, like many of us do.
Mhm.
and she's a part of it too. She's the antagonist of the play. So we are super excited, and for me, this is a uh, like I always say, I support the arts, and I always support other theater projects and other things privately, very quietly. But I really wanted to get involved with this very openly because it's so dear and near to my heart. The story that we're bringing to the community, that we're bringing to the world, and it's the last time it's going to be in Miami, but it's not the last time that we're going to bring it to other places. I think now it's time after this to bring it to other communities, maybe Boston.
Oh, please
Uh,
cross fingers, please. Let me see if I
so
can find a way to help y'all.
so that people who have never heard about this or who have this vision of this that's very different um, can view it, can see it um, through their own eyes.
Wonderful, wonderful, man. Well, much success to you in the play, and I know it's gonna do phenomenal numbers, man. So go for it, man. I'm happy for you. Congratulations on that.
Thank you, my brother.
Yeah, man. So let me just wrap it up here, man. Let's have ask a couple of questions. This is the $50,000 question I always tell all my Cuban guests. Would you think in this lifetime we'll finally see a free Cuba?
Absolutely. We
Yeah.
will. We'll see a free Cuba, and then the task of rebuilding Cuba will be much more difficult than the task that we thought was the most difficult, which was to free ourselves from from this misery.
Yeah.
We have to learn about everything that has happened over the last 6+ decades. And when we are in the process of rebuilding a new republic, we owe it to those who died hoping for that day and to those who will come after us
Hmm.
to make strong institutions, lawful institutions that can deliver a system of law and order that will supersede whatever little nepotisms and NIMBYisms that we as individuals might have. That will be the difficult task, and it will be the task of bringing nation together. The ones in who have a different mentality that we will not understand because we didn't live their lived experiences. Us from the outside who will have to come and play a role, and they won't understand us, and we won't understand them. But there's one thing that's going to have to unite us: the vision for a better tomorrow.
Hmm.
So that's the real hard, difficult task that's going to come before us, but it will come in our lifetime, and we will dance and we will sing and we will march in a free Havana and in a free Cuba. I have no doubt about that. And we
All
have
right.
to visualize it because if we don't, then what are we doing this for? You
Yeah.
know,
Well said. Well said. Well said. And last question. You enjoy yourself tonight? We're going to
man,
torture?
I love I love what you do. I've been meaning, to find time to sit down with you
Mm,
and to get to know you better, and to support what you're doing. It's brave, it's
mm.
important, and I just want you to know that, like, I see you on our group chats on Instagram, I see what you do, and I really appreciate it. From
Thank you,
someone
brother.
who knows that there is a million things that people have to do every day, and they can choose to just be like, you know, live their lives. And we
Hmm.
can't be like, oh wow, why are they doing that? It's just like there's a reason why. It's like this is
Yeah.
a hard thing to talk through, to care about, to fight for after you've seen it not succeed for
Yeah.
over 6 decades, right?
Yeah.
But I applaud you for what you do, and I'm
Thank you.
grateful. I know that you are really gung-ho about this. Like I've seen you on marches, I've seen you put things together
Mm,
in up in Boston.
mm.
And it's very meaningful. And I will say this, Cuban Freedom March is also going to be at the Oslo Freedom Forum. We were just chosen to speak at this major forum and participate in it uh, next week. So I'm
Right.
taking our whole crew
Cool.
um,
Cool.
up there, and we're gonna have a vigil for the political prisoners in our little stop. We have a stop on our way to Oslo. It's in London, and we're
Yeah.
gonna go in front of the Cuban regime embassy, and we're gonna let the Europeans know that hey, Cuba is not a place to vacation because the sun never shines for the political prisoners in their jail cells. So just keep that in mind.
Well said. Well said. And this is where we're gonna wrap it up, yo. Oh, before we get out of here, hey, you owe me a shirt. What somebody
I
from your crew
do.
owes me? Yeah, somebody. Yeah, let me get that shirt with
Somebody
Alian
from my
Collazo.
crew definitely owes you a shirt,
Yeah,
and it's on my notes,
yeah.
and we will make it get to you. When
I,
I saw you in DC, I was like, I should have given you my shirt
yeah,
because we are so backlogged with those shirts. Those shirts are so catchy, but they are so real. They're catchy
yeah,
because they're real. And it says this march would get me killed in Cuba,
yeah,
and it's if we did some of the marches that we're doing in Havana just organically, you'd probably never see a lot of us ever
yeah.
again.
Off with our heads. Off with our heads. We already know what it is out there. Yeah, I'm into Florida soon. So once I get to Florida, we definitely got to liquor. We got to catch. I don't know if you drink mojitos or drinks, whatever the case may be.
Of
We we
course, man.
got we got to do it
And
up.
remember, anything that you need, anything that I can ever help with,
Yeah.
if you're in Miami, mi casa es tu casa, mi hermano.
Gracias, hermano. Gracias. Muchas gracias, man. Yeah, man. So that's what it is, man. It's your boy, Cuban Mike. Alia, muchas gracias por todo, man. Hasta la próxima. You could catch me here every Friday from 6 to 7. So I'll catch you next time on Friday, 6 to 7. Same tape deck time, same tape deck channel. I am out of here.